So we're going to do this a little different. Vicky's going to do a presentation first, and then we'll get into the club business. Vicky Bevan. A little applause, please. Perfect.
So hopefully you'll be able to hear me. My voice is not the strongest usually. I just need to be able to see. All right, so I've been a FAST team representative for about 14 years or so. And in the last couple years, the FAA has been putting together these monthly topics for presentation to groups. This one, yeah, I know it says December. Actually, it's from last December. The reason being that some of the topics are more interesting, at least to me, than others. And this one is a little bit about performance and limitations. So that's what's on the agenda today. The FAA has several groups that study aircraft mishaps, and we're going to talk about some information from those groups and also about aircraft performance parameters and calculations. There's also some suggestions on how to help you predict aircraft performance, and we'll talk a little bit about limitations on aircraft and some tips and tricks that will help you avoid performance-based accidents. So the FAA has the Joint Aviation, or the General Aviation Joint Steering Committee, which are a series of working groups that study why certain accidents and incidents happen. And we're going to talk about two different groups and a little bit about their conclusions. So this particular group is the system component failure. This particular one is about power plant issues. And what they have found is that pilots have, upon occasion, unrealistic ideas of aircraft performance. And if they are willing to monitor the performance in a reasonable way, they can essentially do better on the expectations. So how do we monitor this? Now, we all know in the airlines that flight data monitoring has been around for a very long time, and they've used it to create basically the best aviation system in the world. Very few accidents ever. In its simplest form, they're talking about the flight data monitoring of the cockpit voice recorder, recording the last few minutes of crew conversations, as well as the flight data recorder, which is recording engine parameters, control positions, the heading, the altitude, and the airspeed data. If you've ever watched the Smithsonian Air Disasters, you've definitely seen them using this information. The equipment and processes to acquire and distribute the data are known as the Flight Operational Quality Assurance, or FOQA. But we don't really have this ability, do we? Well, depends on what level of airplane you're flying. If you're flying something that's got a box like this, then it may have the capability to download, or for you to download information from it. You can kind of see this one has both EGT and CHT data on it. Doesn't have airspeed on it, but it definitely has fuel flow and oil temperature and all that good stuff. Also, more and more airplanes, people are putting in recordings of their flights. And this can be very useful on accidents as well. Let's see, where am I? Okay. For general aviation, we don't have that automatic data. We're going to have to download it. But as time goes on, there's more and more information available. As I said, the Smithsonian Air Disasters thing, it's interesting to see what they can get off of a busted GPS. And I have seen ones where they've been looking at the handheld unit that the pilot was carrying. So manufacturers are offering data monitoring information. You probably would download it and then send it off to the manufacturer, or use a computer program to analyze the data. Now, other people are doing things such as oil analysis programs. Obviously, this doesn't have the granular detail of something like this, but you can definitely analyze whether or not the engine is making metal and perhaps stave off a catastrophic failure while you are flying the airplane. Some airplanes, especially, some aircraft, especially helicopters, have metallic chip detectors. If they see metal, they know it's time to land now. So all of that can be ours in the future, but we're going to talk a little bit about how you can monitor performance yourself in a little bit. This is a second group, the General Aviation Joint Steering Committee, talking about loss of control accidents. Most fatal general aviation loss of control accidents are due to what they have found: aeronautical decision making or bad risk management, and kind of a subset of aeronautical decision making, single pilot resource management skills. Occasionally, investigations have discovered causal factors resulting from unreasonable expectations of aircraft performance, especially when operating at the edges of the aircraft weight and balance envelope. That's why the loss of control group is suggesting that we strive for an improvement in pilots' understanding and calculation of aircraft performance. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about a little bit more. When we talk about performance, we're usually asking about three questions. Essentially, how much can I haul, or how many people can I take? How far can I go? And then finally, how long will it take me? Hey Mike, could you hand me my water? It's either that or you can watch me cough. Okay. All right, so how far can I go, and how long will it take me to get there? These all sound pretty simple. We've after all have a lot of data in the pilot's operating handbook on this information, but there's a lot of interdependent variables that have to be considered to answer each of these questions. Most of these variables have to do with performance, but the most important variable doesn't, and that is the pilot. don't find pilot stuff in the POH. So a recommendation of a way to plan a flight is to decide how much weight you want to haul to what destination. Start with your crew and passengers, then whatever you want to take along as well, the cargo, the bags, the golf clubs. And if these items alone exceed your aircraft's capability, you'll either have to make multiple trips, leave the golf clubs, or get a bigger aircraft. Once you know how much you want to haul, you can figure out how much fuel you can take, and that together with your weather information will tell you how far you can go. If you have enough to get to the destination, plus an alternate destination, plus a reserve, then you're probably okay. If not, you'll have to figure out where you're going to stop en route and how much that is going to add to the time frame as well. When you run the weight and balance calculation to make sure you're going to be operating within the weight and balance limits, you need to have that information. You need to have the weight and balance information to use in predicting your aircraft performance. But you also need a little more information. You have to consider your departure and arrival airports, the runway lengths, the obstacles, and the environmental conditions, specifically the density altitude. If the field is short or it has an obstruction, you may not be able to safely fly in and out of that airfield. And it's very possible to fly in and crash on the way out. Just because the book says the aircraft can do it, it does not mean that you and the aircraft can do it. Pilot skill and experience count for a lot when you're flying. And the closer you can get to the POH performance figures, well, the better you will be, but you need to be conservative when you calculate your performance and consider adding a safety factor. Some pilots add as much as 50% to the takeoff and landing calculations to give themselves a buffer. Now, we can figure all this out by consulting the POH, but there's one more variable that we have to consider, and that's the one that POH doesn't have in it, and it's also the one that a lot of people don't take into consideration, and that is the pilot. The POH figures and all of our calculations don't mean much if we can't duplicate them in our flying. That's why it's important to document your performance capability at least yearly with a CFI. Fly a typical mission weight and try to duplicate or simulate mission density altitudes. That way you'll know what you and your aircraft can do. In order to know what performance you or your flying machine are capable of, you'll need to establish a baseline. Think of your baseline as a reference point that will relate your performance and the aircraft performance under a given set of environmental circumstances on a given day. Human factors such as fatigue, environmental factors such as higher density altitudes or even just higher altitude will result in performance below your baseline, while proficiency training and lighter loading will likely result in above baseline performance. The key point to remember is that for any given flight, you need to determine how you and your aircraft will perform. Your baseline is your foundation for that determination. This is a sample baseline calculation sheet. It's actually taken from the Alaskan Off-Airport Operations Guide, and it's available at the URL at the bottom. Or if you are just looking for it, it's on FAAsafety.gov in the library section under Alaska. Okay. Now, of course, we don't think maybe it's not as compelling because our density altitudes don't quite get as high as, let's say, in Colorado or Alaska for that matter. But the only way you can know whether you're going to meet that performance figure that you calculated is if you know how good you're going to fly. So to establish your baseline, you need to load your aircraft with a typical mix of fuel, cargo, and passengers. Probably a good idea if one of them is a CFI, maybe to stop you from doing something weird. Calculate your test weight and note the runway condition, elevation, the density altitude, wind direction, and speed. Also note what rotation and climb speeds you intend to use and calculate 70% of the rotation speed. We'll talk about that in a couple slides. Next, you'll fly several takeoffs and landings and note your performance each time. Obviously, this is going to have to be full stops. Okay. When you're done, you can average your performance figures and create a baseline chart. So, a little bit from the Alaska book, but also general rules of thumb. For takeoff calculations, if you're using a fixed pitch prop, and especially if you have an older airplane that doesn't seem to take density altitude into account, there are plenty of them out there. You would add 15% to your calculated takeoff distance for each 1,000 feet the density altitude increases. For a constant speed prop, you only get to add 12% per 1,000 feet of increase in density altitude, and this is only good up to 6,000 feet. When you are planning a takeoff from a short, unobstructed runway, establish a midpoint landmark, about 50% of your calculated takeoff distance. And that's going to be your go, no-go point. If you haven't taken off by that point, well, you got a problem going. Now, for that 70% idea, which for this one they're using 60 as your rotation speed, at that 50% point, you should have 70% of your rotation speed. If you haven't accelerated that much, something is wrong. You need to stop and evaluate, hopefully on the runway. If you have obstructions, we're going to take 70% of the rotation speed again, but we're going to look for us to have gathered that by about 30% of the available takeoff space. So for Tipton, I went ahead and looked at the performance figures for 783 Foxtrot Mike, making it easy on myself. I also made it a standard pressure, so I didn't have to calculate that as well. And if you're looking at the takeoff distances, we're talking about 995 for 30 degrees Celsius and 1066, I think it is, for 40 degrees Celsius. So 95 degrees Fahrenheit, sounds like July. It's right in between. You're right, it was today. I hadn't thought on that. So that gives us a ground run of 1,030 feet. So I'd say that Tipton probably has some obstructions. So we need to calculate 70% of the rotation speed for a 172, 55 knots. So that works out to 38.5. And then 30% of the distance. So that's about 300 feet or so. So where is that on the runway? Well, it's probably about the second or the third stripe if you start with a short field procedure, more or less at the beginning of the pavement here. And if you haven't reached about 40 knots by that point, you probably should abort. Certainly if you're not, if our ground run is 1,000 feet and you're still on the ground by the midpoint, there's something seriously wrong. Because the midpoint is about 1,500 feet. All right. Now, when you're landing, the FAA is very much into stabilized approaches. And what they're talking about with this is at some point after you turn final, you should be fully configured. So as much flaps as you're going to put out, the recommended airspeed, or if you don't have a recommended airspeed, which some old planes don't, oops, sorry, wrong button. Unfortunately, that's sometimes what I do. They recommend 1.3 VSO. Anybody remember what VSO is? Okay. About velocity stuff out, landing configuration, stall speed. Okay? And you also want to be at the proper altitude. Okay. If you look around the various publications, the FAA is kind of saying you should be stabilized at about 500 feet above the ground. I kind of disagree with that because that's about where I turn on final, and I may not be quite stabilized at that point. So what altitude do you think we should be stabilized at for a little 172? I don't know, 100 feet? How about 200 feet? 450 feet. If you look at the glide path indicators at Tipton, the lights, you'll notice that it seems like on both ends, as we go from the grass, or pardon me, the trees into the grass, it seems like we're about 300-ish feet or so, if you're solidly in the center. So that might not be a bad place to kind of say, am I on speed? Am I more or less center line? Am I configured the way I want to land? And if you have the option, gear down. Okay. So that will result in getting closer to the performance figures in the manual. Now, there's quite a lot of variation in the way that we fly, on the distance we fly on final. But you don't want to cut it too short because that doesn't give you enough time to gradually lose altitude rather than drop out of the sky. You don't want to leave it too long either because then you are dependent on the power to get you that approximately 4-degree angle into Tipton. So kind of a compromise on that one. If you look at the FAA books, they say somewhere between around a half a mile final. And just remember, your GPS is counting from the middle of the airfield. And then, of course, on 2.8, we got to remember to avoid that surface class Bravo, right? Once again, the pilot is the greatest variable But if you fly often, if you document your baseline performance at your usual mission weights and density altitude and fly regularly with a flight instructor, you're well on your way to getting close to those figures. Does anybody remember the I'm safe acronym? There's the what the letters are for. And depending on when you got your license, the FAA goes back and forth between eating and external factors. So let's take a little bit of time and talk about aircraft limitations. Aircraft limitations do come from the physical laws. For example, certification testing involves loading an airframe to the point of structural failure. This happens to be a picture of the Airbus 380 wing being tested to failure. If you see the wing that angle, you probably have a problem. Okay. But for our little guys, they just loaded it up until it failed. Okay. Max gross weight, of course, is determined in reference to that structural testing. VNE is also determined according to when the onset of control flutter is experienced. If you violate these limitations, then you are going to have bent metal. Regulatory limitations are based on physics, but they also include a safety factor. So the airplane is as strong as it is, but a little fudge factor for when Mother Nature adds to the stress. Some other common limitations, the one that most pilots think most about is how much weight and is it in the balance, the center of gravity. We're used to seeing the max gross weight limitations, and some aircraft have limitations for takeoff and landing weights as well. The placement of the weight is important too. It makes a difference whether the weight is comprised of passengers, cargo, and fuel. Anybody know what a zero fuel weight is? It's something that you run into with some general aviation multi-engine aircraft. The one that I flew was a Seneca. Its max gross weight was 4,200 pounds, but the zero fuel weight was 4,000 pounds. I can load 4,000 pounds into the fuselage, but the rest of that 200 pounds to the max has to be in fuel. Otherwise, you bend the joins between the wings and the fuselage a little too much. The baggage areas, of course, have weight limitations as well. So for 172, what's the limitation in the back? Come on, you fill these guys out every year. It's 120. I think we need to look that up, right? How about the very back, the ski rack in the back? That's 50, right? Okay. All right. What happens if we're outside of the center of gravity? Let's say we're too far forward from the center of gravity. Sorry? If we're too far forward, it may mean that we cannot lower the nose. Or raise the nose. Which one is it? It's raise the nose, right? Okay. And too far aft, we might not be able to lower the nose when we need to. Okay. And the airplane might fly funny too. Yeah. Now, most people do their best to remain within the weight and balance envelope. But sometimes you get surprised. For example, I was flying with a nice slim pilot in the 152, and before I sent her up solo, I'm glad that I did the weight and balance, because it turned out that without me, if she flew for more than an hour, the airplane CG moved outside of the envelope. Well, it was pretty easy to remedy that. There was obviously plenty of weight left. So we put a big bag of approach plates in the back. Nobody, well, very few people would try to fly above the max gross weight and out of the center of gravity. But the consequences of doing that is manufacturers calculate the airframe life limit based on operations only to the max gross weight. Operating above the weight puts additional stress and fatigue onto the airframe and will cause it to fail sooner than predicted. How much sooner? Well, we don't know. Because how often was it flown that way? And how often was it overloaded? And while it was overloaded, did it fly through turbulence at above VA? We don't know. So let's talk about some other limitations. We're familiar with the speed limitations. That's almost the first thing your CFI teaches you, right? Don't go beyond that. Okay. They are based on flight physics and component strength, and they're dependent on the design limits in aircraft configuration and the flight environment. So VNE, never exceed. You will overstress the airframe. VFE, that's flaps, maximum flap extension, full flaps usually. And then VLE, landing gear. It's the maximum you can move the gear. About the yellow arc. That's the smooth air portion. Yeah. Okay. But what if I'm flying in the yellow arc and I get a bump? Is that okay? Okay, so I should slow down. They really do mean smooth air. And the reason they mean that is maneuvering speed. At maneuvering speed, the airplane is rated for 50 feet per second acceleration, which is around 34 miles an hour or so. Maneuvering speed is, on this chart, is right about there. But beyond that speed, it's actually 25 feet per second, or 17 miles an hour. And it's actually not unusual to get transient gusts that are that energetic, even with light turbulence. So the guideline is, don't fly in the yellow arc unless it's really smooth. And if you're descending, probably around somewhere around 3,000, 2,000 feet, you're going to start getting bumps from the ground. So you probably should have slowed up out of that by that point, and maybe even slower than maneuvering speed. way back in private pilot class, you were forced to learn how much loading each category and class allowed. So most airplanes are normal category, most of the ones we fly. And there's positive and negative Gs. Some airplanes are utility category. Don't look that different than the normal ones. And in some cases, this happens to be the chart for the Warrior. You can see that the Warrior is actually normal category with a subset, a very forward and low weight loading. You can do some things that you can't do in normal category. I'm not going to say this Warrior because I know Warriors are not allowed to spin, but typically that would be where you would be able to spin the aircraft. But we're looking at about 1,900 pounds, so not much fuel, light pilots as well. And then the aerobatic category, where obviously they are stressing themselves and the airplane a lot more. Finally, we leave you with this thought. Many limitations are easy to exceed, so pilots must be careful to operate their aircraft within the limitations all the time. And we owe it to ourselves, to the next pilot that's taken the airplane, and those who are going to be flying these airplanes 20 years in the future, to treat the airplane nicely. It'll pay it back. Now, for each one of these wings presentations, there's always a plea for more people to participate in the wings program. And the FAA's phrase they love is, practice does not make perfect, perfect practice makes perfect. For some reason they love this quote. It's from Vince Lombardi, the famous coach at Notre Dame. And the FAA actually has come up with a new promotion for getting more people to do wings. Now, one of the positive things about doing wings is that you will, of course, be a more proficient pilot, a more informed pilot. The carrot actually is that it resets your flight review. You have to do 3 knowledge events, online or in-person seminars, or 3 flight activities. The flight activities can be combined. In other words, you could do enough flight activity during your annual check to qualify for the 3 activities. So they're suggesting do one section every month, every 3 months, every quarter. And their suggestion is aeronautical decision making in spring. This is the online courses. In summer, you have positive aircraft control. In fall, in-flight icing. And then winter, which is optional, would be avoiding loss of control. Flight activities that they suggest are the, in spring, takeoffs and landings and go-arounds, which kind of makes sense since we might be a little rusty trying to avoid the weather in the winter. Summer is slow flight stalls and basic instruments. And fall is airport operations. And then the winter is air work, proficiency, maneuvers, and ground reference maneuvers. Now these are suggestions, but the idea is that if you do it quarterly, you would very regularly become a very proficient pilot and have a new flight review. All right. One more advertisement. Okay. Yes, I still have seats. All right. Hold on.
Hey, Vicki. I just also wanted to mention that the WINGS program, if folks don't know, if you go through that program, certain insurance companies will actually give you a cheaper rate by going through that program. So just something for folks out there.
Thank you, Vicki. That was very informative. So we're going to go through some club business and see what's going on. Recent accomplishments. This is good. Andrew Dwyer, back there. Guys, private. I do not think Rick Niles is here. Drew, is he here?
No, he's not here.
I think he's actually out flying right now.
So it takes a village, by the way. It took Ken Urban, Vicky, and Rick Niles.
You're a complicated guy.
There's more authenticity.
Is James Cottrell, is James here? James is not here. Ken is, his CFI is here. Good job, Ken. Brian Weeks, where's Brian? Brian's right here. Good job, Brian. And Vicky was Brian's instructor. Is there anybody we're missing? Solos? Okay. So, good job. Let's see what we got next here. Recent issues. Just to 781 Fox Mike, the radio's not picking up 132.77. We thought it was just the #1 radio. Sue and I swapped that out. It's not the radio. We think it's the antenna. If you're flying that airplane, the second one was picking up 132.77, but there was a squawk that it didn't happen the other day. So if it happens, you'll have to tell them and go back to 119.7 or a frequency that you can use. Or if it becomes a problem, we've ordered the antenna. Hopefully we get the antenna in soon, and hopefully that is the issue. Everybody know the ICAO flight plans. Everybody's experts at this point. One of the things we wanted to let you know is if you're familiar with that, some of the stuff in the past was you had to put a 4-letter identifier in, and then in the remarks for the departure of the destination. If you're using 1-800-WX-BRIEF, you can now put in the gate for the SFRA in the destination or the departure. They've expanded that field, so that helps you. All aircraft equipment. Basically everybody in the equipment is SG. I'm talking VFR for right now, except the 150, which is an S only. IFR plans, you're going to need to put more information in there. Surveillance equipment, everybody's except the 150 is in Echo Bravo 2. That's the transponder mode S with the ADS-B in and out. The 150 is a C, just a mode C. Yes, sir.
Yesterday when I filed on the 1-800 weather brief,
Yeah.
she wanted something in addition to the SG.
Okay,
She
so
wanted a C.
so
An A or a C.
the question was is that he filed and they wanted more than just SG, the Sierra Golf.
They want the surveillance equipment as well.
Yeah, so that would be, help me, that would be
Echo Bravo.
Echo Bravo 2, which actually would be in the surveillance section.
I told her that, she still wanted something else.
Okay.
C for aircraft.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, sir.
I was reading some of the FAA flyers, when you put in your surveillance equipment for ADS-B in and out,
Yep.
there's also remarked that in the, I think, Block 18, you're supposed to put in SUV stroke, I think 260 Bravo for the 1090, and then the code for the Mode S code that goes with that airframe. I don't know what that requires, IFR or VFR.
Okay. I have up on here one of our assignments. Well, one of the assignments you can do, which we all should probably do, is there's a 1-800-WX Brief does a good video that we're going to have up here that you guys can look at home, and hopefully, I'll be honest with you, everybody's learning this. I flew back from Shannon Sunday night down in Fredericksburg, and the briefer wanted to talk to me, and ask me questions on how to do the ICAO system. And, you know, so we had a conversation for like 10 minutes on him asking, you know, what are you guys doing? What we were told versus this, that, and the other thing. So it's kind of a work in progress. I have been filing with Sierra Golf for all my VFR flights in the 1-800-WX brief without any issues. I think the problem is if you're flying IFR, if you're filing an IFR flight plan, yes, you'll have to get some more stuff in there for them to know what you're using in the plane. But for VFR, from practical standpoint, they shouldn't care, because you're not going to be using approaches, you're not going to be doing departure procedures or arrivals or stuff like that. But it's, it is a work in progress. Hopefully the video, I watched the video, it gives you a lot of good information on that, so you take a look at that. Club updates and status. Overall, we're doing well financially. Please stay on top of your currency. Sue's been out of town for family issues, and getting us on the weekends is always tougher. Take a look if you're going to fly on a Saturday or Sunday just to check the currency. If there's a problem, shoot an email or give me a call, and we can clean that up. Tie down the planes. We're just tax and hobs put in. Check the squawks. Yes, some of them have some squawks. We're going to get in. We'll talk about this in a minute. We're trying to clean up the squawks when we can and get that sorted out. Checklists. The checklists disappear from the planes. There's a dwarf or a troll that comes in and takes them from the airplanes. Gremlin. That's a good word. I personally think you should have your own checklist for the plane. I do. I still have my checklist from when I was, learning with my notes and stuff. I think it's a good idea. Plus, it helps you in case you get to the plane and there is no checklist. What are you going to do? Pull out the POH and open that up and start looking through it? Dale.
So I have kept up very recently. I understand new checklists have been put in the planes, although gremlins have been stealing them.
We had new checklists created and they're pretty much gone.
Did they correspond to the ones that are on the website?
I believe, I'm not sure, we'll have to check the library. We do have checklists on the library. The checklists are there. If they're the updated ones,
I print the
we'll
ones
check.
on the website and I keep them in my own book.
Yeah, and that's.
And if that's still good, that's good.
If you're using a checklist, it's got everything that's coming out of the POH. We'll be happy with what you're
I
using.
admitted to Suzanne, one of the gremlins that took a checklist and put it back today.
We have a mea culpa coming here. A confession from Drew.
Sometimes the gremlins bring back.
Clubhouse thing. If we got the printers in the club, don't try not to print out, the newest novel that you have, because we're running through paper and we're running through toner. Try to do your pre-flight stuff. If you're doing an IFR flight and you need the approach plates, print them out at home if you need to print them out. Try to do that stuff there. We were trying to limit the printers to the dispatch sheets, and pretty much that's it. I don't think we really need anything else printed. If you're doing it's up to you if you get your own numbers. But to keep that in mind, because we run out of toner more regularly than we want to. Okay, plane status. All the planes are ADS-B except for the 150. The 150 should be getting a Garmin 430 and a GTX 345 and become IFR capable. The Aero engine should arrive hopefully next week. I believe that we'll get it installed. I don't know if we'll be able to get it into the avionics for the G5 install then. If not, we'll fly it until we can get that down there. 781 Fox Mike's engine, the new engine has been ordered and will be hopefully here by the end of the month. And then once the mechanic decides to swap it out, we will swap that out. The Aero's got 2 new reupholstered, repaired seats in the front. They just got them in. Ken just dropped them off today?
Yes.
Yesterday. And they look really good.
Right.
So they'll be good there.
So is the engine.
Parking brakes. So if everybody recalls, back when Mike Grady was running the show, he encouraged us not to use the parking brakes unless you needed to. I'm not going to stand up here and say not to use them. You should be on the brakes with your feet regardless. Do not trust the parking brake. The issues that you could potentially have, especially when we had the air with the arrow, is sometimes you can get some air in the line or something, and the brake might not disengage, and then you're stuck. So I'm not telling you not to use the parking brake, but definitely do not trust the parking brake. If you're going away on a trip and you go somewhere where it's busy, they got an FBO, they got jet traffic, they got guys running around, and you're leaving the plane, they will not want you to have the parking brake set, because they may need to tow that plane out of the way so they can get that jet in. So take chocks with you. If you're going away from Tipton, feel free to take the wooden chocks with you. When you get somewhere, chock your plane, but leave the brakes off, because the linemen usually do not want you, because if you don't do it, they're going to hook up the plane and they're just going to drag it with the brakes set.
By the way, we are not locking our doors. I think we've always...
True, but it depends. You could lock the door, leave the brakes off. If you got equipment in the plane, lock the door so they can't get in, but they can tow it. Mike?
The reason Mike Grady was so big on not using the parking brake unless you really needed to was very simply the parking brakes in the airplanes. Parking brakes in a car use a mechanical link to pull the parking brake on with a cable. Parking brakes in the airplane are effectively the same thing as standing there on the brakes the whole time. They keep constant pressure on the full brake system, and in the long run that's not good. That's why you chock the plane and then kick the parking brake off.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the arrow, you actually breaks mushy.
All right, what do we got next? Everybody's seen this. It's just the board staff. Volunteers. All right, we lost. Biggest issue the club has is maintenance. Keeping up with maintenance, getting the planes fixed. Phil Seibel, who was our maintenance officer, did a fabulous job. Phil is no longer with us. He moved on. So we have that vacancy. We are looking for somebody to help fill that vacancy. Basically what you would be doing is monitoring the squawks and the maintenance with the aircraft, and you would also be having discussions and talking to primarily Dave Hopkins, the mechanic on our field, and potentially mechanics on other fields, and then coordinating with Sue and I to get the planes repaired and maintained and inspected. That's one of the biggest things. Sue and I are having it's hard for us to keep on top of everything. It's hard for us to keep on the squawks, and we're trying, but it was much easier when we had a full-time person taking a look at that. So if anybody's interested, please reach out to us. The other thing is the membership officer. We get a lot of inquiries for membership. This one's a little easier because you can do pretty much everything from home with the computer. It's when we get new people who contact Sue or myself and want to join, we can refer them to the membership officer. They can get the application started and all that other stuff. So if anybody's willing to do that, please let us know, because that would really be a big help. We also are planning on, it's not up here, but we are planning on having the planes washed. Larry Neff has the equipment, and we're going to try to set that up sooner than later before it gets too cold, so we can wash that. We'll ask for people to come out and help us. All right, maintenance issues we talked about. So this winter we're hoping to convert all the planes to electric preheat, so we can just plug them in. That's the plan. So the Red Dragon heaters we have, Red Dragon doesn't maintain them, inspect them, or even sell them. They got out of the business, primarily because of liability. People were catching on fire or something. It's bad when that happens. And then the lawyers get involved. It's even worse. So we caught it because we were about to send them all back to be rehabbed, because they used to rehab them over the summer, and it was cheap, and it was a brand new system, and they said, nope, don't send them to us, we don't want them. So we're working on getting the preheaters electric to plug in. Cameras on the office and flight line, we've been saying that for months. Who knows if it'll ever happen. This is last assignment, the new assignment. this is our new assignment. There's two videos here. The first one is the 1-800-WX brief. And the second one is a weatherwise from AOPA on IFR flight planning and making a go, no-go decision. I would recommend everybody watch at least the ICAO, the IFR pilots, and the IFR students. Definitely should want to take a look at the weatherwise IFR flight planning video. It's pretty good. It gives you a lot of stuff. So give you guys a second to get this. And remember, we'll have the slides up on the website.
Can you go back one slide back?
Because you didn't do that one? This was the last assignment, which was thunderstorms.
It's also an FSB. If you go to FSB, they're under news.
Yeah.
You'll bring it up.
You got it, Dave?
Yeah.
All right. Everybody got this one? Dale?
So Frank, so
Sir.
for, there are people who aren't here,
Yeah.
and it's recommended to go find these things, and I found it interesting that the FSB, the flight scheduling web app on your phone has links to the ones up until March. And then, but everybody should understand that the links to June are on the website, not on the flight schedule program.
Okay.
So, is that correct? So, and are these gonna be posted in the website?
We try to post everything on the website, and we try to post the current stuff on FSP.
Okay.
So you should be able to look at one or the other and find both the slides and the video.
Right, but it's kind of confusing because you look at FSP and it's got the safety briefings from March and I think December.
That's the older one.
And those are the older ones, but nobody should be confused and think like, oh, well, they're not up or posted yet because you need to go to the
Okay, I see what you're
website
saying.
to find June.
All right, we'll figure that out with Ken, who's running the website.
So I don't have access to put them in FSP, but I do put them all on the website.
Okay.
So the better
And
place to
I'm
go
bringing
is
this
the
up
web.
to emphasize
Yeah.
that people should know they need to go to the website to find the
Well,
current
if
links.
there's permission you can put them on FSP, then I put them on.
Yeah, I want them on the website.
Yeah.
They don't belong on the
So
website.
right now, go to the website to find the safety meeting video and the safety meeting slides.
So in case you didn't get a photograph, it's gonna be on the website.
It will be on the
Yeah.
It'll be on the
website.
website
Give
as
us
soon as I get
4 or 5
the
days to get it on there.
Yeah.
And maybe to lighten your load on FSP, just put a link to our website and then you get
Yeah,
there.
you shouldn't be going to the FSP. for
Okay.
safety reasons.
All right,
That's
okay.
not
And don't
what
be
we're
distracted
going
by
on.
FSP.
Exactly, don't distract them.
He's distracted.
That's the way we used to do it.
Go to
Okay.
the
Because
website.
we didn't maintain our own website when we were under.
CWF.
They maintained it for
Right,
us.
but
Yeah.
So we couldn't update it.
Ken has it.
Yeah.
Hands on.
All right, so summation, website, safety meeting stuff. Questions, complaints, good.
That barbecue thing we talked about when we watched the films.
Yes.
It's all about the food.
Well, there's going to be a lot of
There will be
food
food if you
and a
want.
keg.
Yeah, it's coming.
All right, upcoming safety meetings, December 4th, holiday social and meeting. Ratco, we're gonna have, Ratco's gonna do his weather stuff, and then we're gonna have our social. Sue thinks that we'll have enough money to sponsor it, so you guys won't have to pay anything, because you're all cheap.
So we want to fly more.
So, yeah, you can fly more on that savings of $15.
That much fly more.
And then we got the other meetings are up there on the schedule. So you got anything you want to
I do.
say?
I
Sue's
do.
got to say something.
I'm gonna say a thing.
We're all in trouble.
Wayne Henry, raise your hand.
Hey, Henry.
Wayne Henry is my main man for the snack bar, which is allowing us to host December. Bruce Hamilton,
Bruce.
my main man. He's my main man, helping with admin. I have been out of pocket for a lot the last 3-4 months, and Bruce and Wayne have helped me tremendously to get through stuff. I will also be out of country from 14 September till 6 October. So these two guys are helping me, and then Frank. So what we said earlier is give us a little bit more lead time if you need some answers, because, you know, I'm not going to be able to answer emails and stuff. We've also had a member who has trouble getting the emails that we send out to the whole group through Flight Schedule Pro. Has anybody else not been getting the emails that we send out? Mike, you aren't either. Okay, we're in It could be him. So everybody else is getting them. All right, good. So there's only 2. Are you Gmail? No. Okay, we'll talk later. I'm talking to him.
Warren Tolson just renewed or whatever. He did something in his account. He said he hasn't been getting the emails either.
Okay, have him send me an email so I have his email. Because I'm talking to Flight Schedule Pro trying to figure it out.
Just check your spam folder.
Yeah, check this. Do you check your spam folder?
I tried to, but I'll check it again. I'll check it again.
All right. But I'm talking to them, trying to figure it out. Okay, that's all I've got. Thank you very much.
Any questions? Anybody got anything they want to talk
So,
about?
Frank,
Yes, sir, Ken.
why don't you say what the last email is you sent out that way so people can check to see if they got it? Because there were a couple of questions back here. How do I know if I'm not getting it?
That's a good question. One of the emails I sent was for this meeting, which you should have got. And then last Friday I sent out the status, I think, of all the planes. And then I sent an email that when the Warrior came back online on Saturday or Sunday, I sent that out. The problem is the guys who didn't get any of the emails aren't here because they never got the email.
Well, they should be. It's the schedule.
They should see the video when we put it on.
Yeah, they should see the video. When
Just
they put
send
it
an
in.
email.
So we'll try to sort that out. Here's the contact for us. Again, if check your currencies so that we try to fix that before it's 7 a.m. on a Saturday morning. Yes, sir.
Flight Schedule Pro doesn't really track like if you flew 2 weeks ago. It doesn't reset it for the 90 days.
The 90 days doesn't reset. You either have to have us do it or one of the instructors do it for you. So that's why you want to keep checking. It's not automatic on the updates.
That's what we're
on the
talking about
currency.
the lead time.
Yeah.
Give us time to fix it.
So you should be, and I do the same thing. I check just, you go into your documents and you look down there. It's got you see a yellow or a red. Pay attention and see what's going on. And then if you have a credit card and it goes out of date, the system actually boots you, and then you go back in to try to fix it, and it won't let you go back in to fix it. So that's another kind of a quirk thing with them. So, all right, that's it. Unless anybody's got anything else. Thank you. Keep flying. All right.
Did everybody sign in? The papers over there, sign in.
I was already long since I was the SFRA.
Take care.
Yes, sir.
Hey, it's back here.